a business and formalizing it. So the formalizing is the bit that Ribbon can assist us with. So we have an idea. We think it is something that is worthwhile. Take us through the process of formalizing that. What do we need before we even go onto that website? A lot of it is actually, in fact, it's actually done online. Nobody walks into the registrar with. So how do we formalize? What do we need? And how do we get that started in a very systematic legal process? Ribbon.
Right. Thank you very much, Yvonne. Thank you also, Renee, for covering most of the conceptual background behind these issues. So the key forms of setting up businesses in Kenya, there are very many forms, but the most popular ones you find, there's a business name registration, then there's the company registration, and also there's a new form which has been there for a while but hasn't become very popular. It's called a limited liability partnership. So these three, once you use either of these three, you'll be able to carry out your businesses the way you'd like. But the distinction between these two essentially mostly falls down to a person's preference, the tax considerations, and also maybe the amount of money and liability which they're incurring. All right.
So take me through this process. So I go onto the government website. The first thing I'll be asked is to, register a business name. Right? Then they do the search and they give you 5 options or whatever, you put that in. So you are sort of securing the business name, which would be Yvonne and Company Advocates, I hope one day. And then what? Once I've registered the business name, is a business name a company?
No, actually there's a slight distinction there. There's what is called a business name, which can be registered as a form for carrying out a business.
Okay.
Then there's a name reservation, which is a process under all this business name registration and company registration. Actually, one of the interesting things that you'd realize right now, because of the reforms that have happened under the Business Registration Service, both the name registration and the actual registration of businesses have been condensed into one step. So when you go to the website and you want to either register as a business name or as a company, you're actually able to go through the entire step of selecting the names which you prefer. And then once you've selected those names which you prefer, the system actually allows you to go straight into lodging the application. So it's what actually the Business Registration Service is called a one-step registration of companies. This has been made so as to make this process more efficient and to condense those processes. So once you've selected the names that you preferred, you'll go on, continue to put in the other applications, the details of the directors, the details of the shareholders. So as you're processing this other information, they're already working on the name reservation. So as to cut out that time that was being wasted in terms of today you come, you do your name reservation, then you have to wait for it to be confirmed, then come back. So that one has been cut out and you're able to go through the entire process. So in respect of these different types, so for a business name, the key person there is the person who's registering it. Because under a business name, it can either be that business name or partnerships actually can also register themselves as business name. So for a business name, you'll do the name reservation. Then you now proceed to put in the details of the proprietor. In this case, if you're on your own, you'll be yourself as a sole proprietor, or if it's a partnership, you'll actually put in the names of the partners. But when you now go to a company registration, the key officers in a company registrations are directors and shareholders. So directors, these are the office holders who actually run the day-to-day business of the company. Because the company is an artificial person, it actually has to run through actual people. So these are the directors. They're the ones who do the day-to-day running. And then you'll also be required to give the details of the shareholders. The shareholders now, these are more or less the owners of the company because they're the ones who will be contributing the capital and owning the stake in this company. And then there's an option for a company secretary, which is not mandatory for private companies, but for public companies it's mandatory, public listed companies rather. Yes.
What is the one thing in your view, especially when it comes to the legal aspect of one, starting a business and then eventually running it, that is often overlooked by many young startups, people who are saying, I want to sell clothes and I want to do it online, and then, I'll just register a name real quick. Many of them would not think to put in place, sort of legal structures or to make sure that they are legally sound. What is one, maybe 2 or 3 things that they often do not think about and that come to, bite them in the end?
The key thing which most people don't think about is the size or volume of their business. Because this is vis-a-vis the obligations which are required. Because for a business name, the obligations which are required to undertake are very limited, because the business name is more or less you're still trading on your own. Your liability is not limited. When it comes to a company, there are a number of compliance obligations, compliance and disclosure obligations, which are required. These are required because as a company, your liability as a shareholder is limited to the extent of the unpaid capital in your company. So most of the time you get people, especially with an entity which hasn't really picked up with all those obligations, rushing to register a company, whereas you can more or less begin with a business name where your liability isn't that, the exposure isn't that high, to the extent that once your exposure starts to become high, there's a very simplified process of converting this into a company. So most of the time, the key thing to really monitor is to compare between the volume and level of your business vis-a-vis the obligations which will be required to undertake under this the specific regime which you've selected.
Okay, I know somebody who started a business. You reserve the business name and, nothing really comes of it, and you're still thinking about it and tinkering with the ideas around it. And then you don't do anything with taxes because, you've not done anything with it, and CKRA knows. They've not seen anything being traded. There is probably no bank account, or maybe you opened one and it's just laid dormant. Maybe you throw in 1,000 shillings, to sort of keep the account running. And then KRA comes in and says, you didn't file tax returns. And you're wondering, for what? We didn't trade. You need to do something with that?
Yes, actually, now that you've mentioned that, allow me to step back a bit in terms of the considerations, because there are also tax considerations which you need to make. Then I'll come back to that answer if it's okay. Okay. Yeah, so for the tax considerations, for sole proprietorship, it's still the person, him or herself, who's trading. So their tax obligation will still remain their individual tax obligation. That on which their own income. For a company is a separate entity, so there's a corporation tax which is charged at 30%. During the COVID period, it was reduced to 25%, but that leeway has been removed from 1st January this year. And then for a limited liability partnership, this LLP, in as much as it's a corporate, the partners still shoulder their own tax burden. Actually, and now in terms of companies, you can actually have either a subsidiary, which is a set-up company here, or a branch of a foreign company. Maybe it's a foreign investor who's coming. They already have
opening
companies.
A local branch?
Exactly. A branch of that. So for that one, it will be charged at 37.5%. But now, in addition to that, there have been other new taxes which have been introduced. There's like a turnover tax, which has been included. Now, this will actually cover the people who are trying to create side hustles and all that, because this covers that bracket of between 1 million to 50 million. So for that one, you'll be charged a turnover tax of 1%. Then there's a minimum tax. Now, for anyone who doesn't fall under all this, there's a minimum tax of 1% on their gross turnover. So beyond that, all these obligations are live once you set up your business, whether or not you're running it. So if you're not running it, you still have that obligation to file your returns, so that KRA is aware that this entity is set up. That one is no. So it's your responsibility to, if it's not running, to file those nil returns, so that they're aware that there's actually nothing which has been filed, because that actual filing of the returns is an obligation in itself, which if you don't do, there's a liability which is incurred. That's where now those penalties usually come up and people get surprised. So that filing obligation is there whether or not you're actually doing any business, so that once you're doing business, there'll be other additional obligations.
Absolutely. Once you start to make money and make profit and have some turnover.